How's it going, guys? Akira here, and today I'll be doing a long-awaited video, right? So, during my live streams, people love to ask, oh, what is your favorite game? What is your favorite console? They like to ask me a lot about, when I used to play Smash competitively, or what do I think of this stuff? Do I like Nintendo over Xbox over Play, whatever. So I was like, you know what? Let me just make this YouTube video right now. And this will be like a part one of I want to say a few videos. So for example, this one I'm gonna do my favorite consoles of all time, my top 10 favorite consoles of all time. And then like in another video I'm gonna do like my favorite games and etc etc, my favorite franchises, well, whatever the sort may be, to answer some questions. But yeah, we're going to be doing my top 10 favorite video game consoles of all time. This specific video won't include handhelds or portables or any of the sort, and it also won't include consoles that are still ongoing in their lifespan that the successor hasn't come out. So for example, you won't see the PS5, you won't see the Xbox Series X, and you won't see the Switch. As of recording, the Switch is still the latest Nintendo console. The Switch 2 has not been released yet. So, with that ruling, the Switch, cannot be in this list, along with the PS5 and the Xbox, right? So yeah, so none of those three consoles and no portables. After, I'm gonna do a video including portables to see, the portables included in a top 10 list. So that would naturally, let's say, push, whatever is number 10 or number 9, out of the top 10, because whatever portable that would be in my top 10, it would kind of occupy and, take up the slots. So it's pretty interesting to see. Who knows, maybe I'll make another one after the Switch 2 has come out and the Switch is already all and done, and see where the Switch might even land in my top 10. But regardless, this is the video we're gonna do now. So yeah, let's get on with it. All right, so at number 10 we have the Xbox 360. I don't know, I think this is lined up correctly, right? Yes, I'm showing it off correctly. I'm showing off the slim variant of the Xbox 360, as you guys can see. Let's see if I can get some angles on this shot right here. But yeah, showing off the really cool Star Wars edition of the slim. So yeah, number 10, the Xbox 360. I'm sure as it won't be surprised to you guys know, but I'm not a big fan of Microsoft currently, the Xbox brand, after the whole Don Matrick situation and what he did with the Xbox One reveal and the launch. And ever since then, to me, Microsoft, like there's nothing interesting to play on it besides very few exceptions. And for me, those would be like the Forza Horizon games that have come out, throughout the Xbox One and the Series X lifespan. Stuff like Rare Replay, where it's a collection of old school Rare games that, include like Conquer and Banjo and Viva Pinata and all sorts of those games. And I think that's pretty much it. Like, nothing too exciting of anything for Xbox for me. But I am a fan of classic old school Xbox. So like Xbox 360, OG Xbox era. And to be honest, I know I might say this in my retrospective of the 7th generation video whenever I put out that video, but this was actually my childhood console, believe it or not. This and the Wii were the consoles I grew up with. You know how they say, oh, you have a childhood console, and for a lot of people, that tends to be their favorite console of all time. This was that childhood console, along with the Wii. The Wii was obviously, good for first party stuff. So, you want to you play your Marios and your Zeldas and that. And then this is where you just played everything else. And, the memories I have of playing this game, playing the first time ever playing GTA 4 and GTA 5 on the 360, and how those games blew my mind as a kid. I was like, whoa, the fact that, GTA 4 and GTA 5 are this big and you can just do all these sort of stuff and it's bigger and better than the old school GTAs like GTA 3 and Vice City and San Andreas. That blew my mind. The Dragon Ball Z games, I know I have huge memories of playing Rage & Blast 2 on here. I have memories of playing Forza games like the original Forza Horizon. The Need for Speed games, even though they weren't that good in this era. I remember playing Need for Speed Run, the Run on the 360. Obviously, dabbling into Call of Duty and the sort. But yeah, this was basically the childhood console, right? I will say though, right, and I don't know if I said this before, but owning the 360, for me, the secondary console, there were still stuff from other consoles like the PlayStation and the Nintendo side of things where those exclusives seem more interesting to me. So I never really dabbled into the exclusive of the Xbox 360 as a kid. Um, because for me the Nintendo exclusive and the PlayStation 3 exclusive seem more attractive. But growing up, and obviously as you grow up you just know more stuff. This has some of the most creative exclusives that Xbox has put out, of all time, right? Besides the OG Xbox, you got stuff like Viva Pinata, you got stuff like Cameo, Crackdown, different type of games that's not just Forza, Halo, and Gears of War, Forza, Halo, Gears of War, Forza, Halo, Gears of War that you see on Xbox One, Xbox Series X. You had those stuff, and I know games like I said, Crackdown, Cameo, Viva Pinata, all those games. They're very fun games and just games that I love playing on a 360. Along with the multiplats that were big at the time, like your Red Deads, your Call of Duties, GTA, stuff like that. But yeah, this is a very solid console. This thing, it in the seventh generation, it turned out to be the worst selling out of the three of them, because the Wii was a hot success and the PS3 made a huge comeback. But regardless, this was the place to play games on the seventh generation, or at least the first half before Don Matrick was kind of um make turning this into a Connect and smart glass box. Because unfortunately, that's literally what the Xbox 360 was towards the end. Literally by like 2012, 2013, this was just a Connect and smart glass box. And it wasn't interesting. And by that time, the PS3 was the more attractive console. But if we're talking about like 05, 06, 07, 08, those early years, this was the more attractive console compared to the PS3. Um, but yeah, that is pretty much it. Those are my thoughts on the Xbox 360 for number 10. I'm probably missing here a few things of that. One thing that this thing did better. I love how this did avatars. It made just feel more connected, more customized. Like this is your Xbox with your avatar and your customizations on it. Meanwhile, the PS3 didn't have stuff like avatars, but it did have themes, right? Cause you could customize your themes and stuff like that. But this one did as well. So little things like that it did better than the PS3 that kind of wish the PS3 had done, or because I know that we also had the Mii's. But regardless, yeah, number 10, top 10. A few years back, it would have been it would have been a very close battle. This being like number 10, number 11, because something like the Genesis would have topped it. But yeah, at number 9 here we have the Sega Saturn, right? I'm showing you off here my white or cream color Japanese one. I also have the all black American one, but my all black American one is in a box in a bin down there, and I didn't feel like taking that out, so I'm showing off the Japanese one. I think this is originally supposed to be a white console, but it's just yellowed out or creamed out throughout the years. But anyways, yeah, number 9, the Sega Saturn, right? Unfortunately, this console wasn't a huge success in America. Kind of like the Dreamcast, or the Wii U. You know, but unlike those consoles, this was a huge success in Japan. Like, oh my god, this was everywhere in Japan. To the point that, fun fact, the N64 was popular in America, but it was a huge failure. It was a colossal failure in Japan. Like the Nintendo 64 was like trash in Japan. Nobody wanted that. Um, but the Sega Saturn was huge. So for example, um, in America, the sales number would be the PS1, and then it'll be the N64, and then the Saturn in last. But in Japan, it was the other way around. The PS1 was still number one, but then the Sega Saturn was number two, and it outsold the Nintendo 64. So this outsold the Nintendo 64 in Japan. which is crazy. Which is like, damn, what the heck must have happened to the N64 in Japan that nobody wanted that shit? Like, but and everybody was getting this instead, or the PS1. But regardless, yeah, unfortunately, due to that, or I guess unfortunately to us, most of the games, I want to say like 80% of the games are stuck in Japan and they're Japanese only games that never came to America. I believe the library, the North American library, this is a little bit over 200 and something. I want to say like around almost 300. I may be wrong on that number. It's been a while since I've done my research into the Saturn, but in Japan it's like 1,500. It's like 80% of the games there stayed over there, never came to America, which sucks. But now that we live in this modern age of like eBay and Amazon and just being able to like import stuff pretty easily, yeah, you get a taste of those Japanese exclusive games, or at least the ones that you can play without having to read a lot or understand or speak Japanese. And wow, this console's library is amazing. Tons of arcade games. This is literally arcade at home. Um, like to the purist. You got stuff like Virtua Fighter, Nights into Dreams. You got just have a bunch of amazing titles that they were these niche titles. They weren't like what you would see in the Genesis like with Sonic and stuff, but classics nonetheless. Panzer Dragoon, Knights, like I mentioned before, and just tons of great games. Although I will say that I even though I do like this better than the Genesis, I still prefer the Dreamcast. And even though I also love playing games in this console, unfortunately, because the lack of games that came to America, I at least for me, right, my since this is my top 10, my experiences will be different than other people. Trying to get American games, it's so expensive here. Like Saturn games, like do they cost like almost like a Switch? Like they're all like over definitely 100. They're all like reaching 200. Um, Saturn games are just very expensive. So, we all resort to getting the Japanese versions of those games. And unfortunately, due to there being a language barrier, right? And, that also could contribute to my fault for not, I should, I don't know how to speak Japanese. And it's like, oh, I should learn how to speak and write and understand Japanese and read. Um, the library, I'm only limited to playing arcade style games that don't need much reading or understanding or speaking Japanese. And at least for me, that does tend to get old for a while. I can only play the same shoot 'em ups, the same racing games, the same fighting games over and over, right? And I'm more of I prefer, I like JRPGs, right? And this console has tons and tons of JRPGs. But unfortunately, since JRPGs are text heavy, you gotta read and understand Japanese. I can't play them. So those are inaccessible to me, and I can't experience that part of the library. And if I do want to get the very few that came to North America, those are like $300. Getting like Shining Force. I think there's one called Dragon Force. Obviously, Panzer Dragoon Saga. That's like a $1,500 game. So that just kind of limits the library to me. And I have a feeling that if I could just unlock all that and be able to play all those games, this would be way higher on the list. But at number 9, it sits pretty. And yeah, it's a very good console. It's probably the most underrated console of all time. I want to say. At least home consoles. If we're talking portable, I'd probably say the Vita is the most underrated. But yeah, yeah, it sits pretty at number 9. Sega Saturn. Up next here we have the Super Nintendo, right? I'm showing off here the SNES Mini or the SNES Classics because my original SNES, it's hooked up all the way over there, and I didn't feel like taking it out. The wires and all that stuff. But regardless, yeah, showing off the SNES Mini since I had this in hand. So yes, arguably the greatest Nintendo console of all time. Definitely one of my favorite Nintendo consoles of all time, with the strongest first party titles, the strongest third party titles of not just the generation but of all time, mind you. And to be honest, I think this was when Nintendo was king and proved to be the greatest, right? I know you may say, oh, the NES, they were untouchable, blah blah blah. Yes, that is true, but I have a feeling that You're at your best when you're being pushed by a competitor, and Nintendo was definitely pushed by Sega and the Sega Genesis, with the Sega Genesis during this era, and they were up against the wall, right? And they only had one thing to do, and that one thing to do was just create some of the best games of all time. This really is Super Nintendo. This is basically Nintendo going super, right? The NES is Nintendo's normal state. This is them going Super Saiyan and just going all out. Everything was an improvement. Super Mario Brothers on NES, Super Mario World on Super Nintendo, way better. Metroid on NES, Super Metroid on Super Nintendo, way better. We can go on with even the third party games, Castlevania and Mega Man on NES. Castlevania and Mega Man on Super Nintendo are way better. Zelda and etc. On NES, they're way better here. And not to mention the new IPs that came out with this one, like F-Zero, Star Fox, Super Mario Kart, Earthbound, the Donkey Kong Country games. Oh my god, I can just keep going and going and going, and you see where I'm going with this, right? This library of this console, it is legendary. Not to mention, it still has some of the best control, one of the best controllers of all time, probably the most comfortable controller of all time. It's timeless. Everything about this is just timeless. You know, you can put me any game on the Super Nintendo, and not just to me, but to everybody else, and you can just play it, and it's just as good as it always was. Not the same with the NES or even the N64, its successor. A lot of those games, sure, they play well, but you can notice their age, their clunkiness, right? As much as I love Kid Icarus on the OG NES, it handles a little bit wonky. Same with Metroid on the NES, right? Kirby on the NES, it's good, but it struggles. When there's so many sprites on the console, the frame rate drops, etc. You don't have the inhale ability, or the copy ability, excuse me. No, wait, excuse me, you do. I'm thinking of the Game Boy one, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless, Kirby on SNES is way better. Stuff like that. Just things like that. This is just Nintendo going Super Saiyan, and they had to just pull up all the stops, and I think it paid off, right? And not only the first party games, but the third party games, Final Fantasy, 6, or 3 in America, 4, 5, Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana. Oh my god, I could just keep going on and just naming and naming and naming different games. The Super Castlevania games, Super Castlevania 4, the Mega Man X games, just on and on, right? Contra, or Contra on Super Nintendo. It just goes on and on. You can't tell me that pound for pound, this probably has the greatest library of all time, or one of the greatest library of all time. So I think there are only two other consoles that can kind of compete with this. And even then, I still think this just might outright beat them, right? I will say this now. A lot of people think the Switch has the greatest library of all time, or the greatest Nintendo library of all time. I don't think so, man. I think a lot of the franchises from this console, and you compare them to the Switch, this just has the better, entry of that long running series, right? For example, I'd rather play A Link to the Past over the Switch Zeldas. I've said it many times, I'm not a fan of the Breath of the Wild formula and the Tears of the Kingdom formula, where, there's no dungeons and no there's the Zelda formula that made up the Zelda formula. With games like A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, Ocarina, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess. You have your open world, and you go in the dungeon, and you basically do dungeon crawler. You find the key, you fight the mini boss, and you get the item, and then you use the item and to defeat the boss, and then use that item to unlock more stuff in the open world. That formula, right? I don't like that Breath of the Wild got rid of it, right? So, I would rather play Zelda here. I would rather play Mario games, the Mario games here, right? Metroid. I think Metroid, at the time of release, Metroid Prime 4 has not come out, but I much rather play Super Metroid over like Metroid Dread and whatever other Metroid games that came out on the Switch, if any. I might not be remembering the top of my head. But just in general, right? At least, I think pound for pound, a lot of these games are way better than the ones on consoles like the Switch, which is another console, people contend for be the greatest of all time. But yeah, that is just what I think of the Super Nintendo, right? Obviously, I did not grow up with this console. I'm a 2000s kid. Um, so if anything, my mom would be something that somebody that like played this in her later years. If she was born here in America. But regardless, right? I think I still go obviously. So I'll play them in retrospective, right? As through the Wii Virtual Console and the Wii U and the 3DS Virtual Console and stuff like that. And obviously the SNES Mini. And funny enough, I emulate them on my PSP and my PS Vita. So that's how I played SNES games, and I played a crap ton of them. And oh my god, I was like, wow, if I was born if I was born like in the late 80s and I was like a 90s kid, this definitely would probably be my favorite console of that decade, or at least of that era, that generation of the early 90s. Um, because yeah, this is definitely one of I have a feel I feel like if I had the emotional attachment of growing up with this console, this would probably be my number one. But since I don't, because I'm too young, I wasn't born when this console was around. That's probably why it's not like higher up in the list. But man, dude, I'm telling you, this library of games, if you have not experienced a Super Nintendo, I highly recommend you um play them any sorts of mean, whether it's getting SNES Mini, or if you want to be crazy and just get the OG with all the cartridges. They cost a lot. Try to get Earthbound and Chrono Trigger. Those games are expensive. Even like Super Metroid. Um, you know, but you could get them on your Switch, on the Nintendo Switch Online, or whatever the other means of way of playing them. But I highly recommend. This is one console that you should always play. That you should play regardless. But yeah, Super Nintendo made my top 10. Oh, and before I forget, my favorite game off the console is Zelda: A Link to the Past. For the longest time, I was struggling. I was like, could have been Chrono Trigger because I was always between those two. But I'll give the Zelda: A Link to the Past the edge. That game is just beautiful. Up next, we have the original Xbox, right? So yeah, the reason why I'm showing you this, the box of the original Xbox, the Xbox is inside of it. And then my other Xbox, or OG Xbox, is in the living room, hooked up and all that stuff. But anyways, regardless, yeah, showing you the original Xbox. And yes, I am one of those weird ones that prefers the OG Xbox over the Xbox 360. And I will tell you now, there will be no more Xboxes on this list because yeah, I think Xbox peaked at Xbox OG and Xbox 360, like I mentioned before. And yeah, Microsoft, ever since the Xbox One release with the whole Don Matrix situation, like I mentioned, they're like I said, they're there's nothing interesting to play or do in those consoles. To me, the interesting Xbox, the cool Xbox, the good Xbox was OG Xbox and Xbox 360. But yeah, anyways, moving on, talking about the original Xbox, right? Like I mentioned before with the Xbox 360, the OG Xbox and the 360 have some of the more interesting Xbox exclusives, right? They're very unique, they're very interesting. They're not the same copy and paste like we see during the Xbox One era and the Xbox Series X era, where it's just more Gears, more Halo, more Forza. So it's just Gears, Halo, Forza, here's Halo, Forza, rinse and repeat. During this era, we had Blinks, we had what was I know Panzer Dragoon Orta was Sega, but it was exclusive to the Xbox, right? We had I know Psychonauts was an exclusive for a while. Obviously we had Halo, we had Forza, we had stuff like Project Gotham Racing, right? Crimson Skies, Blinks 2, Otogi 2, and then I know stuff like Cameo and Viva Pinata, or the 360 era, and Crackdown. But it's still like, within this Xbox and Xbox 360 era, where this was just peak Xbox, and their exclusives were unique and interesting, and you know they were creative, right? That's the word I want to look for: creative and unique exclusives. That it just made it desirable, right? Blinks and Cameo and Viva Pinata, and Crimson Skies, you know, they're, you know, unique, right? You know, there's nothing like them, right? But then, you know, after that, you know, it's just more Halo and Gears, right? But anyways, so yeah, that's the reason why I really like the OG Xbox a lot, and I prefer over 360 because I think the exclusives here are slightly more creative and unique over the 360. Um, and for me, as I'm a fan of Sega, right, and I'm a fan of, like, you know, the Dreamcast and the Saturn and the Genesis. This was basically Dreamcast 2.0. This console right here, when the Dreamcast failed and stopped production, right? Sega, they still had a lot of unfinished games that were being developed for the Dreamcast. So they were just finished and they were just put on the Xbox. So this is basically your Dreamcast 2, right? We had continuations, like I said, of Panzer Dragoon. We had Crazy Taxi 3, which is continuation of the first two on Dreamcast. Shenmue 2, obviously the sequel to the first one on the Dreamcast. You had a bunch of the Sega games like Sega GT, right? You know, just continuing off the more legacy Sega stuff. That they were put on the OG Xbox, right? It literally just felt like a Dreamcast 2. On top of that, you know, helps that Microsoft helped with the not the operating system, they put Windows on the Dreamcast so you can play online, you know, on the Dreamcast, and you know, obviously that carried over with, you know, to the original Xbox. So it literally felt like a 2.0 Dreamcast, which is, you know, with its own exclusives, you know, like Halo and you know, Blinks and all that kind of stuff. So it just felt like natural, like a natural progression. Like if you had a Dreamcast and you were sad that it failed and there were no more games for it, no more consoles being produced, you get an Xbox and it just feels like an upgraded from that, which is very cool, right? Along with, obviously, like I said, its own identity, you know, and you know, as that, you know, obviously, you know, Xbox Live revolutionized you know, the online play, you know, ever since, you know, after that, you know, there was a new standard, right? um I didn't grow up with this console because I was way too young for this generation of, like, you know, Dreamcast, Xbox, PS2, GameCube, right? And like I mentioned before, my childhood console was the Wii and the Xbox 360. So I grew up with the seventh generation because by then I was already old enough to, like, you know, play games and understand what the heck I was doing. I feel like if during this era, if you would have given me like an Xbox or PS2 controller, I was still a little kid, so I probably would have, like, either put it in my mouth and chew on the buttons or just thrown it on the floor like little kids do. But yeah, regardless, yeah, I really like the OG Xbox. My favorite game for this is Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. Super Monkey Ball Deluxe is my favorite OG Xbox game. And I like the other ones like Panzer Dragoon Saga, Crazy Taxi 3, a lot of the Sega stuff. That's what really hits home for me in this. And Blinks, I really, really like Blinks. Blinks is a really cool platformer game. But yeah, OG Xbox. I know I'm the weird one to like it over the 360 and the other ones, but this is my pick for my top 10. All right, up next we have the original PlayStation. Now I'm showing you off. What I'm showing you guys is the PS1 Slim, um, because my original PlayStation is, you know, hooked up all the way up there, and you know, I didn't want to, like, you know, unplug it and, you know, mess with all the cables and stuff. So I was like, you know, I'll just show you guys the PS1 Slim. But if you've never seen an original PlayStation, it's just like this, but like slightly bigger. But yeah, regardless, showing off the PS1 Slim, but anything, you know, PS1, right? Um, yeah, I prefer it over the Super Nintendo. Um, and I put it above over the Super Nintendo. It was a close battle, right? Um, if we were to say what are the best consoles of the 90s, this and the Super Nintendo are definitely top two. I believe you know, that would be the case for most people, right? Sega Genesis will be up there as well, so that would be like a the triangle of top three, right? Genesis, SNES, and PS1. But wow, if you thought the SNES library was legendary, this guy showed up and said you haven't seen anything yet. Um, this was a console to get in the late 90s. If you wanted to eat at the cool kids table, if you wanted to not get um you know, your $5 stolen and given wedgies in the locker room, this was a console you should get in the late 90s. The PS1. Obviously I wasn't there because I wasn't born when this console was around, but I'm just saying from what people tell me. But anyways, yeah, PS1. What else can I say that hasn't been said about the PS1? Uh, Sony, first time ever coming in, people were like, "What the heck, Sony? You guys make the Walkman and CD players and TVs. Like, what the heck are you guys doing making a console?" That's like when any all these other companies during the '90s, right? The fourth and fifth generation, they call them the graveyard generations because that's when a lot of companies that had nothing to do with gaming wanted to make a game console and they all just died. So literally the '90s was just a bunch of dead consoles with like Nintendo and Sega just fighting at the top. And even old school veterans like Atari, they were like dead. They were piled up in like those like dead consoles, along with those random companies I wanted to make one that weren't do with gaming. So people thought that Sony was gonna be one of them. And no, guess what? It blew everything out of the water. No console at that time had reached 100 million units. The highest consoles before the PS1, the highest selling consoles was the NES, the NES at 60 million, the Super Nintendo at 49 million, the Genesis I believe at 39 million or 40 million, and then the Atari 2600 at 30 million, right? And then the PS1 says, "Nah, bruh, 100 million right here, dog. 102 million to be exact." But yeah, all the third parties, this is where all the third parties were at. Some were on the Saturn, but not really. None of them were on the N64. Everyone was here, dude. All the third parties were here. You know, great first party games like Twisted Metal, obviously, Ape Escape. This little guy right here, but unfortunately he's Japan only. Toro from Doko de Moisio. Um, medieval, excuse me, right? Um, just it just goes, it stacks on Parappa the Rapper, um, everybody's golf for Hot Shots Golf, and just going on and on. And tons of first party games, the first party games, and then the third party games like Konami obviously with Metal Gear and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Square with Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and they were just going on a rampage of Final Fantasies, and then they went back and ported 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the PS1, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, you name it, man. Every game was on this here. You want to play Tony Hawk is on here. You want to play I know at the time GTA wasn't that big, but like GTA 1 and 2, I know GTA 2 was pretty big, was somewhat notable here. Sports games, action games, RPGs, puzzle games, um you name it, everything was in this console. Um, and like I mentioned before, obviously I wasn't born when this console came out, but I experienced this console, through retrospect and going back and playing a lot of those games. And yeah, they're very good games. They're very fun. They haven't aged as well. Because that era, like that Nintendo 64, PS1 era, it was early 3D, so they still feel, a bit clunky and stuff, but there's some kind of charm to it, right? That makes it feel like, I guess, off the time, off the era. But obviously, they haven't aged as well as like, let's say 16-bit games, right? Like on Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. But regardless, popping in Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy 7, it's still such a fun time. Um and I would definitely say this is one of those consoles that a lot of people have definitely put in their top 10, and it is in my top 10, right? Um I will say though, I think just like Nintendo, I think Sony has gotten better since. I do think that as amazing as this console is, and as amazing as the NES is, I legit think every console after the NES is better than the NES, right? For Nintendo, including their portables. Same thing with the PS1. I think that every PlayStation since console and handheld are better than the PS1. And a lot of them you can play PS1 games on them. Like the PSP has a huge PS1 library, the PS Vita. You can play all your PS1 games on your PS2 and your PS3. And then the PS4 and PS5 have a lot of the digital library here. Regardless, there's not a shortage of PS1 games or devices that can play PS1 games, whether it be physical, digital, you name it. But yeah, I highly recommend, if you've never played a PS1 or any of the games, I highly recommend you playing a PS1. And yeah, definitely worthy of my top 10. And yeah, my favorite game of the PS1, it will be Final Fantasy VII. If we're speaking, if we're excluding Japanese titles, if we're including Japanese titles, it'd probably be Doko Demo Isio, the game where this little cat is from, Toru Inoue. He's the mascot of PlayStation, but only in Japan. So if you've never heard of him, he actually is a mascot. I know in America and other places, people are like, "Oh, who's the Sony mascot? Is it like Astrobot? Is it Kratos? Is it Sackboy? Is it Ratchet and Clank?" No, it's actually this little guy right here. He is the PlayStation mascot. But yeah, PS1 guys. All right, guys. Up next we have the GameCube. Now, as I'm showing you guys, I'm showing off my Japanese orange one. My American GameCube is a black GameCube, because I think the purple indigo one looks stupid, and it's for little kids. And you want to be an edgy guy, and you want to get the cool black hardcore console. Jokes aside, yes, I do have. That's my American one, the black one. I think the indigo one is cool, but I was like, nah, I like the black one. The black one looks sleek. But anyways, this is I'm showing off my my Japanese orange one. It's pretty cool. But yeah, the GameCube. What can I say about this console, right? Um I did not like this console for the longest time growing up, right? I know I mentioned in a video before, I it's not a spoiler, whatever, screw it. For the longest time when I was growing up, the Nintendo 64 was my favorite console of all time. Obviously, even though I didn't grow up with it because I was too young for it. Like I said, I grew up with a Wii and an Xbox 360. Because that's when I was old enough to play games. But with the discovery of the Wii Virtual Console and stuff like that, I was able to discover Nintendo 64 games, and I thought they were the coolest things ever. I was like, wow, Mario 64 looks pretty cool. Um, Wave Race 64, GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Diddy Kong Racing, blah blah blah, all those N64 games, right? And then people were like, "Oh, that's cool," but a lot of those games are better off on GameCube, right? You know, 1080 piece, 1080 snowboarding, excuse me, 1080 degree snowboarding. Oh, the GameCube one is better, right? The Mario games, the Zelda games, you know, Wind Waker is better than Ocarina, or you know, um, etc. Right? Smash, you know, obviously Smash, the GameCube one is better. You know, etc. Right? But I remember being like, nah, that looks stupid. Like, what the fuck? Like Ocarina of, like, Mario 64 is definitely better in Sunshine. Ocarina of Time is definitely better in Wind Waker, which it is. I think Ocarina of Time is way better in Wind Waker. Um, so I've always thought that the N64 is the coolest console ever. But then the more I started discovering other consoles, right, as you get older, and then I would go back to play the N64, man, I would feel the age in that console. And all of a sudden, the Mario Party games on the N64 don't feel as good. But the GameCube ones, they feel nice. Mario Kart 64 doesn't feel as good, but Double Dash feels amazing. I've always thought Melee was better in 64, obviously. So that one, you know, I remember I admitted it a lot. Sunshine, now I actually like Sunshine more than 64 as an adult. You know, stuff like that, you know, it keeps going on and on. Blue Wave Race, I think the GameCube one is better than 64. Same thing with the 1080 snowboarding games. I think the GameCube one is better. So it just goes on. The only game that I still think is better on N64 is Zelda. Ocarina of Time is still way better than Wind Waker. But everything else, I was like, yeah, the GameCube versions of those games are way better than the 64 ones. And then I started falling in love with the GameCube, right? This console, it sucks. I hate that it was a failure, and I hate that it did not grow up with it because I was still too little and I wasn't old enough to play games, you know, when the Wii came out. Because man, getting games for this console right now, it feels like winning the lottery is like an easier thing. Games are rare for this console, they're expensive. If you try to do other methods, you know, through PC, if you know what I'm talking about, they're getting harder. And for the longest time, you know, at the recording of this, a Switch 2 hasn't come out yet, but everything has been revealed, so we know GameCube games are coming to NSO on Switch 2. But even then, that's not for me because that's digital only and you're just renting it. So screw that. Man, I would have loved to been old enough to grow up with this era of Nintendo or just consoles, right? And get all those games when they were at retail price, because man, bro, GameCube games are expensive up the ass. But regardless, that doesn't stop me from playing, getting other methods, wink wink, nudge nudge, of playing games. And wow, this has the most creative Nintendo library of all time, right? Some of the strongest games of all time, right? When it comes to the Nintendo library, right? Not as strong as like the Super Nintendo, but some of these games are better than the Switch counterparts, and definitely more creative, right? And kind of like what I said with the Xbox brand, where the Xbox OG and Xbox 360 era, those were some of Xbox's, Microsoft's more creative, unique, um, and interesting exclusives. I have that same feeling with GameCube. Some of those creative, unique exclusives of all time are on the GameCube, and they turn out to be some of the best, right? And even games that are of long running franchises, I think a lot of their entries are the best, if not on Super Nintendo, then on GameCube, right? Um, Biggest example, Mario Party's games. Like, if you were stranded in an island, I would rather, and right, if you were stranded in an island and they give you two options between these two consoles and access to the whole library, and you're stranded in the island for like a year, I would pick let's say GameCube over Switch. I'll pick GameCube anytime. I'd rather be stuck in an island with the Mario Party games on GameCube over the Mario Party games on Switch. Mario Golf on GameCube, way better than the Switch. You know, the sports Mario Golf, the Mario games like Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Mario Baseball, blah blah blah, whatever. Mario Strikers, the GameCube ones are way better than the Switch ones. Like, oh my god, by far. Um, you know, I I know I have my gripes with Mario Kart 8, and I don't like Mario Kart 8 and how the game feels, and the tracks are too controlled and that stuff. Man, I play Double Dash any day over Mario Kart 8. I rather play Zelda on GameCube any day over Zelda on Switch. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, right? I'd rather play Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Four Swords Adventures on here, right? Um, Over the one on the Switch. Mario, either or. I can take Odyssey or Sunshine. I like them. I like them both around equally enough. And third party stuff, man. A lot of you got like Need for Speed, and you got one that came to my mind was called BMX XXX, which apparently it's like a a game that shows revealing aspects of female body. Let's just say it like that. Nintendo was trying to be edgy and hardcore and creative and unique, and all the stops in this console, and I hate that it failed, because that creates nowadays that everybody wants to play them, and because since the console failed and there's not a lot of consoles and a lot of games out there, that's where they're all expensive on like eBay and stuff. Unlike with popular consoles like the PS2, where there's PS2s everywhere and there's PS2 games everywhere and they're all cheap, right? Um, and I hate that. And this is a console I wish succeeded, and I wish I grew up with. And yeah, man, the games, I can just go on and on and just talk about the GameCube and how great that generation was, the sixth gen, not just for Nintendo but for any of them. Um, I know I've said this for a while. There was times where I don't know which of the two consoles I preferred, the Xbox or the GameCube, and I would go back and forth. Um, and I know around last year I was preferring the Xbox over the GameCube, but I've gone back to play some GameCube games that I haven't played, and I actually tried playing the Xbox again as well. So I kept in mind on playing both consoles, switching back and forth from their libraries. And right now, as I'm preferring the GameCube, but it's one of those things. Those two consoles are so close to me that I don't know which one I prefer from the time. But I guess today I prefer the GameCube over the OG Xbox, and yeah, I don't know. I can just gush and gush and gush about this console. The Game Boy player, 4 ports on the controllers, the memory cards. Just like the PS1 did the memory cards, and like the PS2 and blah blah blah. Those consoles did the memory cards as this one. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. This would be the greatest console of all time if Nintendo stuck with regular sized discs. I wholeheartedly believe that, because think about this. Imagine a world, alternate universe, where GameCube also got games like Devil May Cry and GTA. Like really, really think about it. Like think about the GameCube, right? It was bigger because you could, accept, it takes in regular discs, so more memory, and then the discs are bigger, and then bigger storage space, and you can put bigger games in it. And you're like, yeah, my GameCube can play Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, Smash Brothers Melee, and Need for Speed, and Devil May Cry, and GTA. That, oh my god, I'm telling you, that would have been the greatest console of all time. It just would have. It just would have. And I think that was the biggest mistake the GameCube, in my opinion, was taking mini CDs or mini discs, whatever you call them, and not taking full-on size discs. And just that mistake alone, um, it held it back from being the greatest console of all time. But hey, regardless, the games are good, regardless of its flaws. It's a very flawed system, but man, the library, it's very unique and creative for Nintendo, and some of the best. And it is my favorite. Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite Nintendo console of all time. At least home console wise. Um, if we're talking portable, there's one that I like better than the GameCube, and that would be, my favorite Nintendo product ever. But yeah, the GameCube, man, I really liked it. I started from not really liking it, and to the point that I really like it. And then yeah, speaking of the N64, now that console won't even make my top 10. Like you're not gonna see it. Like spoiler alert, you're not gonna see the N64 in this top 10. But yeah, you will see the GameCube. And yeah, not only that, but this also got Sega games, because that's when Sega was going third party. So some of the games were going on GameCube, some on PS2, some on Xbox. So Sonic Adventure 2 was really good in here. Super Monkey Ball was good in here. Crazy Taxi was good in here, etc. Even though I have Crazy Taxi, I have it on PS2, because like I said, PS2 games are very cheap because they're everywhere. Meanwhile, the GameCube version of Crazy Taxi would be more expensive, because GameCube games, they're rare and expensive, because there's not a lot of them out there in the wild. But yeah, my favorite game for the GameCube is, it's a three-way tie that I'm trying to battle, is Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Super Monkey Ball 2, and Twilight Princess. I'll say it's Twilight Princess. All right, up next, it'll be the PS4. I'm showing you off this PS4 Slim that I have over here. But my main PS4 Slim that I use is hooked up there, but I got this other one laying around here. So yeah, I guess I'll just be showing you off this other PS4 Slim. Don't mind this. I don't know what this is. This is my brother's PS4 Slim, so I guess I'll have to ask him what the hell he did to his PS4. But anyways, yeah. Showing off here the PS4 Slim, but PS4 regardless. PS4, PS4 Slim, PS4 Pro, any of them. The PS4 console itself, what an amazing console. What can I say about the PS4 that has not been said? A lot of people say it's the PS2 of its time, right? Of the modern era, right? Where everything is on it. All the third-party games are on it. All the best first-party games are on it. Every developer is making games on it. It is easy to develop for. It is destroying its competition, right? That kind of sounds like the PS2 to me, or the PS1, back in their day. But anyways, regardless, yeah. I don't know. All the at the time, the Xbox was struggling because of Don Matrix's dumb decisions, and nobody wanted to place an Xbox, excuse me, an Xbox One. So everybody who was on a 360, including myself, because I played 360, my majority of the 7th generation. We all flooded to PS4. Everybody who had a PS3, they all flooded to PS4. Everybody who had a Wii as a kid and they were growing up and they did not want to make fun of by saying you have a Wii, they were all flooding to PS4 because the Xbox One sucked, the Wii U sucked. So yeah, what can I say? Probably one of the strongest first party lineups for Sony ever, right? God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon, you got Gravity Rush. Well, Gravity Rush 1 was on a Vita, but Gravity Rush 2 was on PS4. LittleBigPlanet 3, Bloodborne, you know, Ghost of Tsushima, right? I can just keep going on and on and on and on about the PS4's amazing first party lineup, right? And then on top of that, the third party stuff, all the third party games played best on PlayStation. Um, you know, GTA 5, um, you know, Red Dead Redemption 2. Um, a lot of people got into, you know, games like Overwatch on console, you know, obviously not the PC versions, but on console. Um, you know, and yeah, from software with, you know, games like Bloodborne was exclusive on PS4, but stuff like the Dark Soul games and yeah, the PS4. Unfortunately, one thing I will say about the PS4 is that um even though it's some of their most their best and strongest first party lineup, it is a lot of low key just copy and paste, right? A lot of games are third person over the shoulder action adventure cinematic games. Not saying that they're bad, they're all amazing. Obviously, that's why God of War and Ghost of Tsushima and Last of Us 2. Even though I personally don't like Last of Us 2, you know, it's you know, universally a good game. You know, Horizon Zero Dawn, all those games are all amazing, but it's a lot of copy and paste and lack of creativity, and they're not unique like how, you know, Sony's first party games were on PS1, PS2, and PS3, and PSP and PS Vita to an extent, right? Um, so that is what my big gripe, right, about the PS4, and the reason why is not, you know, even higher. As amazing it is, this is a near perfect console as well. The last time I ever said that it being a near perfect console, I would, you know, I would probably say the SNES earned that title, or the PS2. Um, but yeah, a lot of Japanese games. I'm a huge fan of Japanese RPG games, so stuff like Nier Automata, Persona 5, a lot of the Neptunia games, you know, stuff like that. Most of them, they were either exclusive on PS4, or they just, you know, ran the best on PS4, or were developed on the PS4 in mind before then coming out on, like, you know, later the Switch, right? You know, after the Wii U had discontinued pretty early. And yeah, this console for its generation was, you know, just reigning supreme, right? The Switch, it came out and you know, did very good as well. But I know people say, you know, is the Switch, you know, is it part of the eighth gen? Is it part of the ninth gen? You know, I wouldn't say there. I wouldn't compare the PS4 and the Switch like that, because uh sure, the PS4 had a head start over the Switch, but guess what? The PS4 stopped production when the Switch was still going on in production. So it's kind of like a weird thing to, like, you know, put them head to head, at least in my opinion, when it comes to like sales and which was more successful and stuff like that. Because, you know, as the Switch numbers kept going up and up, the PS4 is stopped production. Um, but yeah, you know, besides the Switch, you know, the PS4 was like the console to get in the 2010s. You know, um, hell, even during the pandemic, because, you know, PS5 wasn't able to, you know, to get, you know, a lot of people, and even myself included, you know, you had co-companion consoles, right? People had a PS4 with a Switch, right? Or vice versa. You know, the PS4 was their main console, and then their Switch was like their secondary. Or, you know, mostly people who were Nintendo fans, they're, you know, if they were to explore a console outside of the Switch, you know, they would get a PS4. I know a lot of people that are mostly Nintendo fans, and they only play Nintendo stuff. You know, from when I used to compete in the Smash community, and a lot of those people are Nintendo only people. They were like, you know what? Yo, I got a PS4. It's like my first console ever, you know, outside of the Nintendo ecosystem, because this console was just so attractive, and the games and the library was just so attractive, and stuff like Persona 5 and Nier Automata and Spider-Man and you know, God of War and Horizon, they were just too attractive to pass up, right? So yeah, the I don't know what else I can say about this console. This console is just amazing. It's just good overall. If there's anything bad I want to say about this console, it's pretty much that. But that's just a gripe. That's just a me, you know, my type of games. You know, like I said about the whole, a lot of them are not creative and unique. It's just third person over the shoulder action adventure games. But that's not an actual flaw. That's just a flaw for me, and why it's not like top 2, top 3 status for me. But hey, it's pretty high on the list, and I don't know what else I can say. I mean, this console refuses to die. Just games just keep coming onto it, and we're in the middle, or going into the middle of 2025, and we got games still coming for this console. um I feel like this might be like a PS2 situation, where we had games on coming out on the PS2 like 14 years after the PS2 came out. We might have this. We might still see games on the PS4 until like 2027, to be honest. Because this console it's like the baseline, right? um Plus, if since if the Switch is weaker, right? If the Switch is around like Xbox 360 power level, PS3 power level, and the PS4 is stronger than the Switch, the OG Switch. Um and if games come out for the Switch, there's no reason why it wouldn't come out on the PS4. So that's probably why we still see PS4 games, because we still see Switch games. And the Switch is the weakest console, um you know that games are still coming out for. So it's like, yeah, like, think about it. If you or me, we're gonna put out a game for the Switch, then might as well put it on the PS4, and then obviously on the PS5 and Xbox and Steam. So that's probably why I feel like until we don't see Switch games anymore coming out for games coming out for the OG Switch, that's when we stop seeing PS4 games as well. Because PS4 is more powerful than a Switch. So I think, third parties, they would just naturally put it as well on PS4, along with obviously the newer consoles like PS5 and Xbox and the upcoming Switch too. But yeah, that's what I can say about it. I guess the only other gripe I have with this console, quote unquote, but it's not even this console itself, is just, I guess, the online infrastructure of Sony, is that, how do I say this? This is basically gonna be the baseline from now on when it comes to like the Sony's online ecosystem, or just ecosystem in general, where your profile and the online store and the PlayStation online store and on the app, this is like the first, and then everything else we just move on. So what I mean by that is that, let's say for example the PSN store, right? On whether access it through console, or on your PC or on your mobile phone. This is the earliest we're gonna see, right? PS4 games on that store, and then because it's the same store that you access on PS4 and on PS5, and eventually on PS6, 7 going on, right? And we can't. A lot of stuff that happened on PS3 is almost like as if never happened, right? So we can't access the PS3 PSN store unless you're on PS3. I don't know if you get what I mean, right? Meanwhile, the PS4 online store, you can access it on PS4, PS5, and on PC, and on mobile phones. But that's not a PS4's fault. I feel like that's just Sony's infrastructure, where they try to reset everything, and basically make this like the baseline PlayStation going from now on. But yeah, other than that, this is a near perfect console, man. I don't know what else I can tell you. And my favorite game on the PS4 is, for the longest time, it was Persona 5 Royal. That is a perfect game. But then I played a little game called LittleBigPlanet 3, and holy crap, that is my favorite PS4 game of all time. It's up here. LittleBigPlanet 3. We got here into the top 3, guys. So yeah, my top 3 favorite consoles from now on. And yeah, at number 3 we have the Sega Dreamcast, right? As you can see here, I have the Hello Kitty edition, the pink Hello Kitty one. I'm still on the lookout for the blue one. But yeah, this is a very rare console, by the way. But yeah, what else can I say about the Dreamcast than what has been said, right? This was Sega at their most creative, most unique. This was Sega trying their hardest, and to be honest, I might even say this was their peak. I know people say, wow, the Genesis was their peak, blah, blah. But like I mentioned before, with how Nintendo used to be and how Sony used to be, when they were like, struggling, they were at, they were putting out the most creative, most unique games some of their best games. And on top of that, the company itself, since they were wanting you to love them, so they were giving you the best deals they had. They were treating you like kings, when they're like, oh, please love me, I would treat you like a king, I would do all that stuff. When a company's like that, that's when they're at their best. And in my opinion, they create some of their best games and have some of their best products, hardware or software wise. And um and then when a company's at the top of the world, they just do the bare minimum. We kind of see that with the Switch now, with Nintendo, with the Switch going on to the Switch 2, where they're just cocky and arrogant as hell. And yeah, but at the end, so in my opinion, I think this was Sega at their most, like, please love me, because they were struggling, and this was their do or die moment. And unfortunately, they died because this was their last console ever, and this console's lifespan was cut short. But man, during that time, they had some of their best games they've ever released. Some amazing first party exclusives, third party exclusives, third party multiplats. Um, you got stuff like Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi 1, Crazy Taxi 2, Shenmue 1. I know Shenmue 2 was Xbox, or at least here in America. You got Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Samba de Amigo. I can just go on and on and on about amazing Dreamcast, Sega GT. I can just go on and on about amazing first party Sega games. And in my opinion, a lot of those games, those first party Sega Dreamcast games, are some of their best games. I think those are even better than a lot of the first party games that they put out on the Genesis, to be honest. And I at least would rather play them over first party games on the Genesis. Same thing with Saturn. Even though, to be fair, a lot of the Saturn ones, since most of the libraries stuck in Japan, I have yet to try a lot of it. But from what I've tried, still, like Nights into Dream is really good, and Panzer Dragoon is really good. But I would say a lot of the first party games on Dreamcast outclass those, right? Um, and then, not to mention third party games that you could play on, like the Tony Hawk games, Resident Evil. A lot of those games, they ran the best at the time, right? Compared to the PS1 and the N64 version. And even then, some of the games on this system run better than on PS2. And GameCube, like Capcom versus SNK2, Marvel versus Capcom 2. A lot of those games, people say that they run better on here than they do on, like, PS2 and GameCube and even Xbox. So there's that, right? Obviously, this wasn't the most part. This was the weakest console out of the four and the sixth generation. But there's something to be said about that, right? 4 players. This is the perfect multiplayer console. And I know a lot of people say the N64 was, but I think this was up there as well. With party games, multiplayer games, online stuff. This is the first console to do online very well. You got the line. This is the 56K modem here that you could put back in the day, but then later came out with the Ethernet one. So you replace this with the Ethernet broadband, and the online is even better. You get play games like Fantasy Star Online and just all those other cool. This is basically the precursor to Xbox Live. What it was, Sega Net, I believe it was called. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. My Sega knowledge is a little rusty, right? Because I haven't I haven't refreshed my memory in a lot of the stuff. But yeah, the library carries this console so much, like, holy crap. Not to mention the memory cards that other than what you see here, other than the Pocket Station, right? Which these are the PS1 unique memory cards. Other than those, the Dreamcast probably has the most and the best memory card, the VMUs, right? Which is similar to that. I should have brought one here so I can show you guys, but it's one in the cabinets away. But stuff like that, right? This, unfortunately, the Sega, they still couldn't come back, from their loss with the Saturn, right? And unfortunately failed, and only lived around 2.5 years, I want to say. And yeah, in late 2001, they discontinued it. And we see a lot of the Sega Dreamcast games, they were ported mostly into Xbox, but also into PlayStation 2 and GameCube. And yeah, there's really nothing else I can say about this console other than the library itself carries it. I mean, there's nothing to the console itself. It plays games, listens to music. You know, it's from that era, goes online. Obviously not anymore, but other than that, yeah, you know, it's. What else can I say? It's compact, it's sleek, it's beautiful as well. If we're speaking the console itself, VGA support in this is beautiful. Runs at beautiful 480p. Um, I in itself got like a Japanese special edition one. Um, you know, you can mod it as well if you want to go with that route as well and play you know, games like that, because like I mentioned before with the GameCube and the Saturn and the PS Vita, since this console didn't sell that much, games are expensive for it because there's not a lot of consoles out there in the wild in abundance, and there's not a lot of Dreamcast games out there in the wild in abundance. So so you know, they're rare and they're far and few between, so you know, they're expensive, unfortunately. But you know, modding makes it easier and you get those games other means, you know, without having to break your wallet. And to be honest, I probably recommend that as well, to be honest, because Dreamcast games are expensive. They're not like Saturn games or GameCube games, but they're expensive. You know, they're like Vita. Well, Vita's not expensive like this. Like out of those four consoles, the least expensive one would be the Vita, but it's still expensive. But you know, they're all up there. They're consoles that I recommend you not physically buying games one by one, because your wallet would just cry and help, and your bank account would just. um, but yeah, I don't know what else I can say, man. I mean, all these games are amazing, and it's one of those consoles where you should experience, right? Obviously, I did not grow up with this because I wasn't even born when it. No, I was born, but I was like a literal baby. I was like a few months old when this console came out back in '99. Um, but yeah, I I heard about this console, you know, in retrospective, right? You know, like I said, I grew up with the, you know, during the Wii 360 PS3 era. um but you know, I went back, obviously, you know, during like the later on, you know, as you get older, you're a teenager, you become an adult, you get money, you know, you get to explore. So you know, I bought a Dreamcast. I want to say it was 2018, 2017. 2018 sounds about right. My memory might be slightly warped, but it was around that era. I bought a Dreamcast and I bought two games. I bought Sega GT, and I want to say Crazy Taxi was included in that bundle as well. Um, yes, because Sonic Adventure was disc only and it was in the console, so it was like Sonic Adventure was in here, but then two physical copies of um um Crazy Taxi and then Sega GT. And that was my first taste. And wow, Crazy Taxi was a lot of fun. Sega GT was like Gran Turismo, but slightly more arcadey. But it was very fun. It had that Sega flavor that makes games so fun. And then Sonic Adventure is Sonic Adventure. Come on. You know, even though I had already played Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, um, on the GameCube, and obviously digitally through Xbox Live on Xbox 360 and on PlayStation 3 digitally. Um, it was very interesting playing it, you know, on the hardware itself, and it's very fun. And after that, you know, I got hooked and I played some of the other games, and yeah, dude, top three, man. My third favorite console of all time. The library is that amazing. This console is that amazing. And like how I said with the PS Vita, it's one of those consoles where everybody that has played this have been telling you are telling you, please try this. You're not gonna regret it. Like, this console is amazing. It just sucks that it didn't sell well, so nobody's played it. So the exact same thing I said about the Vita applies to the Dreamcast. But yeah, my favorite game on the Dreamcast is Sonic Adventure 2. I know it's a basic answer. I'm sorry, but it's a very good game. Sonic Adventure 1 is up there as well, like in my top three. You know, it's number two and number one. Both Sonic Adventure games are, you know, my number two, my number one. But yeah, let me know, what do you guys think about the Dreamcast? And do you like this cool color? It's pretty cool, right? So my number two console is the PlayStation 2. Right, I can see here from this angle right here. Yeah. My fat PS2 is hooked up in the CRT, and then my slim PS2 is somewhere down there. And I didn't want to dig through the bins and stuff to get it, so I had the box in close proximity, so I grabbed it. Why not? But yeah, the PS2 is my second favorite console of all time. You know, what can you say about the PS2, right? Just like the Super Nintendo and the PS4, I think this is also a near perfect console, just like those two that I mentioned. And yeah, the reason why this goes above them is, like most of these people when they make a top 10 list like this, is experiences, right? And I guess flaws, right? For me, not that the Super Nintendo and the PS4, I guess, do things worse than the PS2. It's just you know I feel like, how do I say this, experience, and also the situation, right? So for example, right, I was born, I was in 98, right? And I was too little obviously to play stuff from this era, right? The early 2000s, the sixth gen, right? PS2, GameCube, Xbox, Dreamcast. But I was old enough to play stuff on the Wii, and that's where I grew up with the Wii, the Xbox 360, PS3, that era, right? So I didn't get to experience Super Nintendo that much. So all my Super Nintendo stuff is retroactively, right? And amazing console, right? Perfect games. PS4, obviously, I got it. I experienced it when it was the relevant console, and I was getting experience it. But the thing that holds me back with that console from being any higher is that, like I mentioned before, even though it has probably the best first party library of console of PlayStation, and it probably has the best library of all time. Whether it's first party PlayStation exclusive or just third party multiplats. Um, to me, the first party games, they were the least creative. Even though they're some of the best, they were the least creative. There were a lot of them were just 3D action adventure over the shoulder cinematic copy and paste games, right? They weren't unique and creative like stuff from this era and stuff from the PS1 era and the PSP and the Vita and the PS3 era. And to me, I hold that with more value than what the PS4 has to offer. And yeah, that's basically the reason why I have this over the Super Nintendo and the PS4, even though those are other consoles that I think are near perfect, just like this one, is the first party lineup and the third party lineup as well. And there was just everything for everyone. For example, in the Super Nintendo era, you can get through that era without having a Super Nintendo, and having a Genesis, right? And in the PS4 era, towards the end though, I would not say towards the beginning. Um, you know, if you in the first half of the age generation, if you only had an Xbox One or a Wii U and didn't have the PS4, you're basically missing like 80% of gaming and the gaming industry, right? Um, but then you can get away with having a Switch only without, when that came out in the second half of the generation, and not having a PS4, right? So that's why I take away points from those as well, because you could go on the whole generation without owning a Super Nintendo and owning a Genesis, and you'd be fine. Same thing with the 8th gen. You could go like at least the second half of the 8th gen, going on just owning a Switch and not have a PS4, and you could be fine. But with this era, you kind of needed to have a PS2 all the way, or you're basically missing 80% of gaming, the industry, the games, everything, because a lot of them did not come on. The Dreamcast was already gone, by the end of 2001, and a lot of them did not come on Xbox and GameCube. And yeah, this was where all the third party games were at. This was where all the first party games were at. Um, this was a console for everything, like hardcore gamers, casual gamers. uh there was something for everyone in this console, right? um and obviously, since I didn't grow up with it, right, the way I experienced and discovered PS2 games, it was, kind of like how I discovered retro Nintendo games, right? The way I just discovered retro Nintendo games was through the Wii Virtual Console on the Wii, and through Smash Brothers Brawl and Smash Brothers Melee, because the Wii is backwards compatible with GameCube games. So I would play Brawl and Melee on the Wii, and the trophy list. Smash was like a museum of Nintendo. So through Smash, Brawl, and Melee, and the Nintendo, the Virtual Console on the Wii, that's how I was able to discover and explore retro games. Right, on the Xbox, It was some backwards compatible games on the OG Xbox, worked in 360, but also Xbox Live Arcade, and just Xbox Live in general. You could play old school games, not only from Xbox, but like Sega stuff and Atari stuff, right? Some, they were on the arcade. PS3, and PS4, a lot of some PS2 games were on the those online stores and stuff, but it was more of like you kind of had to have a PS2 because by the time the later half of the seventh gen and obviously PS4, you cannot stick a PS2 disc in the console. So I would have to go and go to friends' houses and play the PS2 and experience it hands on, right? Even though we were already like into the 360 and PS3 era at the time, um it was still fun, right? As a kid, you play whatever and it's fun, right? So I remember going to people's houses and I remember playing games like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, um, and Need for Speed Underground 1 and Underground 2, and playing games like or seeing people, because my dad would not let me play, but seeing people play stuff like GTA San Andreas and Vice City, and I remember seeing stuff like Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank, um and the Dragon Ball Z games. Oh my god, don't get me started on Dragon Ball Z, Budokai 3, Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and obviously, stuff like that. Just all that huge library games, just experiencing them, going to people's houses and playing them, and basically experiencing the PS2 that way. Um, I was like, wow, this console, it's amazing. Like I remember as a kid, right? And I had a Wii, and I think by that time we already had a 360 because we got the 360 Slim in around 2011. Um, so I think we had just gotten the 360 Slim, and stuff like that. But I remember being like, wow, the PS2 is like old school technology, but like a lot of those games are just as fun, if not even more fun than what I'm playing on Wii and on 360 and on like Nintendo DS. Um, and it was one of those things where like, wow, okay, damn, this console, if it holds big boys with the HD consoles, is crazy. And then obviously later on, I ended up getting a PS2. I want to say it was during the mid 2010s, like 2016 ish, right? This was like the PS4 had already been out and stuff. Um, because I wanted to like be like, wow, okay, I want to experience that when I experienced as a kid going to people's houses and playing it, like because I was way too little when this came out, and I was old enough to play games during the Wii and 360 era, and those were the consoles I grew up with. And yeah, and obviously, it was also a test where people were saying, oh, nostalgia, a lot of the games are not played as you remember them. um a lot of them, they will, the expectations will fail you, and they will play worse than how you remember them. No, PS2 games, they play just as good as you remember them. Budokai Tenkaichi 3, Budokai 3, GTA San Andreas, the Need for Speed games, Ratchet and Clank, everything on PS2 plays now just as good as I remember playing it at other kids' houses when I was little. And that, to me, wow, that is amazing that a console can still hold the test of time. And I could say the same thing about Super Nintendo, but it's just unfortunately for me, I didn't have that experience with the Super Nintendo. Um, so I guess it's not his fault that it takes away points from that, but it just is what it is, right? I had that with the PS2, and then obviously after owning one, or owning of quite a few now, I have one that's modded, I have one that's vanilla, I have a slim one, I have a Japanese one, for Japanese games, and I have quite a library up there of PS2 stuff. I can comfortably say and enjoy its library, and it probably has the greatest library of games of all time. It's only competition, I would say, like I mentioned, is the PS4, um, and the Super Nintendo, right? Obviously Steam, but I'm counting consoles only. I'm not counting like PC or anything, because wow, there is a game for everyone in that console. And but the amount that you see me praising this console, you would think is my favorite console of all time, but it's not. There's one console that I prefer over the PS2, and I think it's also just a testament to how good the sixth generation was, and how I said it in the GameCube segment. and I failed to mention it in the Dreamcast and Xbox segment, where I wish I grew up with that era. Because think about it, all those four consoles from that generation are in my top 10, and that tells you that that generation was amazing. The Xbox is in my top 10, the GameCube, the Dreamcast, and the PS2 are in my top 10. And um, if you know me in real life, you know how much I praise the OG Xbox and the Dreamcast, and you would think, oh my god, this guy, like, his favorite console probably must be like the OG Xbox or something, or the Dreamcast or the GameCube, and it's like, nah, buddy, you haven't heard me talk about the PS2. I can talk about this console for hours. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I don't know. I feel like if I just keep ranting on, it'll probably just be like every other YouTuber saying the same stuff. But that's all I can say, man. Probably the greatest library of all time. Um, if we're talking objectively, right, without, you know, my favoritism or my bias or whatever, I think this might be objectively the greatest console of all time. Like, if we're doing a top 10 list of like objective, you know, how the console and the games were, this would 99.9% of the time be number one, and it'll be the greatest console of all time. How amazing this console is. But yeah, PS2 is my number two. So damn, what is my number one console? We'll find out. But before that, I will tell you my favorite console on the PS2 is, as much as I want to say Budokai Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, it is not. It is Okami. Um, and Okami is one of those games that it's been ported on newer consoles. So it's on PS4, it's on Switch, it's on Xbox One. So you know you don't have to go and hunt a PS2 and a copy of Okami. You can play that on the newer consoles. But yeah. Also another thing too, if you're a retro collector, right? Unlike the GameCube and the Dreamcast, this sold like crazy. It's the best-selling console of all time, 160 million units. So that is good news for you and for me, because there is 160 million PS2s out in the wild, and they're super cheap on eBay or on thrift stores, or in a Goodwill. So you find them everywhere. So PS2s are in a abundance, so they're cheap, and PS2 games are also in abundance and super cheap. So unlike the Dreamcast and the GameCube that are unfortunately super expensive, this and the games are so cheap. So the entry barrier is very low, and you can enjoy PS2 even now if you've never played one, because the games are so cheap. But yeah, Okami, my favorite PS2 game. Number two, crazy number two. You know, they often say your favorite console of all time is the one you grew up with, or is the one you have the most nostalgia for, or is the one you have the most memories with. Um, you know, whether those memories or that nostalgia is you growing up with the console from a childhood, or maybe it's a console you had during college when you were out in college and you played it, you know, the dorms with your friends. Whatever it may be, right? Those are what a lot of people associate their favorite consoles with. And you've seen it on a bunch of top tens, right? You've seen people put the Genesis in their top one. You've seen the Super Nintendo, the PS1, the PS2, you know, the NES, stuff like that, right? But for me, my favorite console is not the one I grew up with necessarily. It's also not the one I had the most memories of, like, you know, staying up till 3 a.m. playing online. You know, it's not any of that, right? Um, my favorite console is a console that I always wanted. I always wanted when I was a little kid, right? Um, I always wanted this console. Every time, you know, and this was back during, like, you know, before everything was on YouTube or Twitter, social media. So you had to get your news through magazines or commercials on TV, or, you know, any of the sort, demo discs, right? Um, you know, that's how you find out this stuff, right? And I remember scanning through magazines and demo discs and promotional videos and commercials, and seeing how this console, um you know, through those ads and stuff and the magazines, I was like, wow, dude, I really, really want that console. To a point where I remember like telling me, obviously as a kid, you can't physically do these stuff, but I was like, man, if I could, bro, I would trade every game I have, every console I have for this console, right? Those were my thoughts going through my head. And I remember when we got one console, right? This was all common sense. When we got one console, I remember being so like, oh man, why didn't we get the other console? Because of a situation where it was my brother's turn to pick the console we were getting, and he chose that console over the one I really wanted. Even though I remember I spent the whole like month be prior convincing him, be like, yo, this console is better because these games are better, this and that, and this and that, and blah blah blah, and look at this and look at that, and all these cool stuff it can do, right? Even my dad, right? I even try to get my dad into this and be like, yo, you get this and that and this with this one, but not with this one. So there's a reason why we should get this one over this one. And I would like, it's one of those things where you look, the grass is greener on the other side. And that's what it was with me, right? We had these consoles, and I would look at the grass on the other side of the fence, and it was greener. And you damn right it was greener, because when I finally got old enough and made my own money and saved up and bought this console, and damn you, it was the greatest thing I've ever played. The smile instantly, right? I'm even smiling right now just speaking about it, is right. The library of the console, the games, the things that it can do, right? All the good stuff that comes with the console itself, with the way it does things, um, features and stuff like that, right? What it had over the competition, right? It's amazing comeback story, right? This console started off people being like, this thing is gonna die and it's dead in the water. And then they said, nope, we're gonna continue supporting it, we're gonna turn it around, we're gonna create amazing games. And it was the least attractive console of its generation towards the start, but by the end of that generation, it was the most attractive console, um, of that generation, where it just turned it around. It became the least attractive console to the most attractive console. It outsold the competition, right? Where people had already called him, be like, oh, this other console's gonna win and this one's dead. It said, nah, motherfucker. And he went Super Saiyan, and towards like the last episode, and just murked it. Um and yeah, I guess without further ado, my number one, my favorite console of all time, that console I'm speaking of is the PS3. I'm holding here the fat backwards compatible launch edition of the PS3, the 60 gigabyte one. But any PS3 regardless. I have a super slim, I have a slim, I have a Japanese white fat one. I have 280 gigabytes backwards compatible ones. I have this 60 gigabyte launch one. I have a modded one that's a slim. You know, yeah, it really is, and it's basically what I said. um this console, it was, how do I say this right? Obviously, I guess mentioned multiple times, I grew up with the Wii 360, like that era, the PS3 era. um but the console, my childhood console, was the Wii and the 360, right? And as you guys saw here, the 360 was lower on the list, and the Wii did not make the top 10. As much as I really like that console, and obviously, if I were to fall in the same spell of nostalgia like other people would, and they put their most nostalgic childhood consoles as number one, that list will look like this. The number two will be 360, and number one will be the Wii. But it's not, right? I'm not blinded by nostalgia, as much as amazing it is, right? I love Super Mario Galaxy and stuff. Um, that console has its flaws, right? The 360 has its flaws that makes it not been any higher on this top 10 list. Um, but but the PS3, when I finally got it, it was one of those things where it was like I said, right? There's the whole situation of, oh, the grass is greener on the other side, and then when you hop the fence and reach the other side, you realize it actually wasn't, or it's just the same. But in this case, it actually was greener it was greener on the other side, right? Coming from like the Wii and the 360 and those consoles with its flaws, uh, I feel like those flaws were balanced, and they were like, what I felt like I was missing with those consoles, it was fulfilled with the PS3, right? Um, Obviously the Wii was like a weak console, so a weaker console, sorry, and third party games were either non-existent or they were just horrible shovelware, right? And sure, you had the 360 to mitigate that, right? That's where I played the GTA games and the Dragon Ball games and the Sonic games on the 360 and stuff like that. But to me, consoles are those amazing third party games, multiplats, plus exclusives, right? Nintendo had the exclusives, but did not have the third parties. Xbox had the third parties, but did not have the exclusives. This console right here has both. It has the third parties and the exclusives, right? It has all the cool games that you want to play, like Call of Duty, Red Dead, GTA, the Dragon Ball games, the Sonic games, the Assassin's Creed games. Just go on and on and on. Plus the exclusives: Twisted Metal, Last of Us, Uncharted, Little Big Planet, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Motorstorm, Gran Turismo, blah 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 blah. Just go on and on. This literally had everything, and it's the reason why I wanted the console so much as a kid, right? Um, I remember seeing a specific ad, and I think I still have this magazine somewhere in there. It's all colored in and stuff because as a little kid, you color everything that you see. Um, I remember this magazine. It was like a Christmas holiday magazine, and it was the all the manufacturers of the consoles showing off what sales they had. You know, the deals, right? Um, the first page or the first section, it was like an overall like the games like third party stuff like from Ubisoft and Sega and EA and all that stuff. Um, but then the Nintendo side, and it was showing off the DS and the DSi and all the games that were on sale. Then it was the Wii era, and I think Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games was like the game that had just recently come out, and like New Super Mario Brothers Wii was on sale, and on the DS side it was like Mario and Luigi Bowser Inside Story, and I think Mario Galaxy 2 and stuff like that, right? Then the 360 side with like Call of Duty and Halo and blah blah blah. And then the PS3 side, right? It was the PS3 Slim, right? And it was the whole Kevin Butler, the now it's 299 ad where the console was reduced in price to 299, and it showed a bunch of games. But there was a specific deal I think at the time where if you got one, you get to choose between three games, and those three games, or it was two games, but I my memory might be warped. I have to look at the magazine again. But one of them was Uncharted 2. No, it was three games. One of them was Uncharted 2, which looked amazing. Like I was like, oh my god, this game. It looks super cool. The other one was Ratchet and Clank, a Crack in Time, I want to say it was that one. It was the Ratchet and Clank, the one that it shows Ratchet's back. I mean, yeah, and Clank's face. I think it was a Crack in Time because Tool of Destruction is a different one. I want to say, it was the one that came out like 2009, 2010, and then it was Little Big Planet, Game of the Year edition, right? So it was those three games. So I think it was the deal was if you got a PS3 Slim, you get to choose one of those three games for free. And then I remember it was like it caught my eye. I was like, "Whoa, this looks so cool!" And then I would look into it, and those three games were amazing. So in my head, I'm like, and plus you had knowledge, right? I was old enough to understand. Oh, Mario is Nintendo. Halo is Xbox only. Like Mario's Nintendo only, Xbox is Halo only. And then I remember being like, oh, like Little Big Planet is like PlayStation only, or like Ratchet and Clank is PlayStation only, stuff like that. Like I had a basic idea of what was an exclusive to each title, and then obviously I had the idea that multiplies, like Grand Theft Auto it comes out obviously on both Xbox and PlayStation, or Call of Duty comes out on everything, or Sonic comes out on everything. So I had a grasp of what was exclusive and what was multiplayer, and yeah, and for some reason the fact that it had the first party games spoke to me more, and they just looked more interesting and more attractive, along with being able to play the third party games that the Wii can't. The PS3 always seemed more expressive, more attractive to me, right? And yeah, and it was the console I've always wanted to have. But then we ended up getting a 360 because I believe it was my brother had to choose that time because I already earlier in the generation I had chosen the Wii, and then it was his turn, and then he chose the 360. And when I said that I was trying my hardest to convince, it was that I was trying my hardest to convince him and my dad as well, because I was like, man, I'm getting my dad involved in this, and so the PS3. And I remember being like, oh, it's free online. You get to play Call of Duty as well, just like on the Xbox, but it has like, you know, free online. It has like, you know, Ratchet and Uncharted and Little Big Planet, these exclusive games that like Xbox doesn't. I was just trying my hardest, right? To like oh, I remember I even went to like AA batteries. I remember being like, Dad, you know how annoying it is buying AA batteries like every week on like going to like a Walgreens to like at 11 p.m. because you're like missing AA batteries for like your TV remote. That happens on Xbox. Meanwhile on PS3, you don't need AA batteries to control it. You just charge it like you charge your phone. Like I remember going to every length of being why like PS3 was better than 360. But ultimately, you know, um, it chose 360 because it was his decision. And obviously, like I said, I enjoyed the console. I mean, it was in my top 10 list, right? But it was always something missing. So then that, I guess, and that was towards 2011, right? The later half of the generation. So then after that, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna save up myself, right? I'm getting older. As a kid, obviously, you can only earn money fast enough, so you can like, you know, it's not like you can go to a job and boom, get $300 real fast. And stuff like that. And I remember too, going on as the generation went on, I would see my brother struggle um with like the 360 stuff, like online memberships. I remember since they had to pay online memberships and the PS3 didn't. And as we're both kids and he's younger than me, you know, he would try to scour every little change and penny and a dollar to be like, oh my god, I need to see if I can at least get like the 1 month Xbox Live membership to get and then I remember he would count like the single dollar bills and like the quarters, and I'd be like, damn it, I'm missing like $3 or something like that. And in my head, I'd be like, or no, I even would tell him, be like, online would have been free. We got a PS3, man. You know, just like little things like that. Or like I remember like when everybody was playing The Last of Us when it first came out, I remember being like, we could have been playing The Last of Us, we got a PS3, man. Just like things like that, right? Like I remember being like, you know, like I guess I was just butthurt about not getting it. But then obviously you grow older, you know, you become a teenager, you go around and asking, telling your parents, hey man, can I get like $5 if I like do the laundry or like do some like washing the dishes? There's different ways to get money until I finally bought a PS3. Unfortunately, right, this is the unfortunate part. um when that finally happened, it was already like I want to say 2015, 2016. 2015 sounds more about right, but maybe, you know, my memory is slightly warped. But I think it was 2015. I was already, you know, this is already, we were well into the PS4, well into the Wii U. The Wii U was already getting axed, and we were into like going to the Switch with the whole Project NX. Um, Went into like the PS4 and the Xbox One. And that's when I was able to muster enough money to get a PS3 Super Slim. Um, and yeah, it was, you know, said I bought one, and like I said, you know, when I finally played it and I played the games, the grass was greener on the other side, right? Um, and but the unfortunate part is that I didn't get to play the console in its prime, so I didn't get to enjoy what other people were enjoying on its prime when a console is on its prime. So like games coming out, you know, going to midnight releases, or getting the hype of a game when it's recently come out, you know, playing it on peak hours online, right? Because let's say if I were to get on a game online in 2015, 2016 on a PS3, nobody's online playing that shit. Everybody's already moved on to like PS4. So you know, I got to miss out on stuff like that. A lot of games, less specifically when it comes to like digital stuff, like whether it's games or servers or DLCs, a lot of them were delisted by them, so I couldn't even like, you know, enjoy stuff like that. For example, like there's a lot of stuff that I would love to experience, but I can't because by the time I got a PS3, either the servers of those games were shut down or those DLCs no longer exist. Like a lot of Little Big Planet DLCs, you know, they didn't exist by then. Or not a lot, a lot did, but some, right? Or just other games, for example, like the Hot Shots Golf, um, the Sackboy and the Toro DLC, you know, they were already long delisted by then. And you were still able to get them if you got the digital version of the game, which I ended up doing it because I really wanted to play as Sackboy and Toro on Hot Shots Golf. Mod Nation Racers, by that time the Sackboy Little Big Planet skin was gone, and I would never be able to enjoy that unless, you know, I like hack a console, you know, the console or whatever. just stuff like that. So those were some unfortunate parts of like being able to get the PS3, later on while everybody was already moved on to like PS4. But when it comes to the core games and what the console was still able to do, it still works as an amazing DVD player, Blu-ray player, CD player. You could load in your songs and listen to music, listen to watch videos and movies, whether it's streaming on like Netflix and Crunchyroll, or just grab a USB disc if you have a movie in it, pop it in and save it into the hard drive. Um, you know, Pictures, videos, music, movies, blah blah blah, etc. Printer settings, all the crazy printer settings that this has. You could literally print stuff like that. Themes, oh my god, like the background dynamic themes and all this stuff is just super cool. And not to mention the games. And like I mentioned before, the ability to play backwards compatible PS1 games on every model, right? I had at that time that my first PS3 was a super slim, so I can play the PS1 games as well. Um, but then later on, when I eventually got this backwards compatible 60 gigabyte one, I was able to play PS2 games backwards compatible. And it's just the ultimate PlayStation, at least at the time. And even till now, like you could literally like if you want to be a minimalistic, all you have to do is just get a PS5 and get a fat backwards compatible launch model PS3, and you play the entire PlayStation library in just those two consoles, right? So there's that aspect as well. Um, Obviously, I couldn't quite enjoy the free online or whatever, because by the time, like I said, when I got it, everybody moved on to PS4, and sure, people were still playing online on PS3, but not enough to like actually enjoy it, because there's no hype around anymore, because the hype was the PS4 and stuff that came out at the time. I think Bloodborne was like hot at the time, and like whatever Call of Duty game was at the time or whatever. Destiny, I think, was big at that time when I got the PS3, when everybody moved on to the PS4. But if we're talking first party games, um, this is by far Sony's most creative first party titles of all time. Like it's not even a question, because they're backed. They were backed against the wall. Their back was, they were in a corner, and they had to be like, we have to create some of the greatest games ever if we want to beat the 360, and they ended up doing it. And my favorite library is the PS3 games. You got like creative stuff like Folklore and Puppeteer and the Motorstorm games, which are really fun, and Killzone and Resistance and Little Big Planet, and obviously, you got the Uncharted games, Ape Escape. You got stuff with the PS Move. You got stuff with online, and just and this era, there were still a lot of offline games as well. So games that, let's say, when the servers eventually die, you can still enjoy those full games, right? It's not like during the PS4 era and the Xbox One, and now with the PS5 and Series X, where every game needs to have a day one patch. A lot of these you could literally never connect this to the internet and still enjoy like 90% of his library. um so that's another really cool part, right? So on top of those really cool things, future proof stuff, the library was amazing, and it had the strongest, most unique, most creative first party library um, of any PlayStation console. On top of the amazing, great third party stuff, like I mentioned, the Dragon Ball Z games, the Call of Duty games, the Sonics, GTA. GTA 4, GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption, blah blah blah. The peak Assassin's Creed games were on this console. Peak Call of Duty was during this console. Um, and then, yeah, like I mentioned, not to mention, the backwards compatibility stuff. And I can just go on and on and on, and why this is like my favorite console of all time. And yeah, it's a story where it wasn't because I grew up with it, right? It wasn't because it was my first console ever. It was because it was, I really wanted it, and when I finally got it, the grass was greener on the other side. But yeah, other than that, let me know what you guys think. How was this top 10 list? I know this style of videos I don't do much. um and let's see if you guys want to hear my top 10 games of all time, if you want to hear my top 10 or rank the Nintendo consoles, or what are my least favorite consoles, whatever, the case may be. Let me know what type of videos you guys like to see. And yeah, my favorite game, before we go, my favorite game on my favorite console of all time is Little Big Planet. Any of them. One, Little Big Planet 1, Little Big Planet 2, Little Big Planet 3, Little Big Planet Karting, Little Big Planet Sackboy's Prehistoric Moves. Any of them, it doesn't matter. Any of those Little Big Planet games are my favorite on the PS3. But yeah, what do you guys think about the PS3? Do you guys like it? You guys hate it? What are your favorite consoles? Is your favorite console the one you grew up with? Let me know. You guys like, if you guys think I deserve it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Still greatly help me in my YouTube channel. Peace out, guys.